This video is to help you with the Test 9 retake. I'm going to go through each question, though there's only really 5 different types of questions, so a lot of it will be repeat, but I'll go through each question so you can see them all done. The first three, all three of these, have the same type of question. It gives you an equation, consider the line, and then it says it wants to find a slope that's parallel to that and a slope that's perpendicular. Well, to find the parallel and perpendicular, we need the slope of the first line. And here it is right here, because that's in y equals mx plus b format, where the m is my slope. Okay, so that number right there is what we're after. So with that in mind, parallel is exactly the same slope. Parallel is the same slope. Okay, so with that, I'm just going to put negative 5 over 4 right here in the parallel line. And make sure you're looking at parallel, because they change that up a little bit. So make sure you're putting it in the right spot. So parallel is the same slope. Now perpendicular, what you need to do is, we have negative 5 over 4. Perpendicular, you reverse those, you inverse them. And that 4 now goes on top, and the 5 now goes on bottom. You just flip it upside down. And then you change the sign. Right here it's a negative, so we're going to leave that as a positive. So that answer is 4 over 5. One of them always has to be negative, and one of them always has to be positive. Doesn't matter. If this one right here is a positive, then we'd make that one a negative. Okay, so it gives you an idea of where to start. That's number 1. Number 2, again, we're given the line. Here's the slope of that line. It's 2. So when we look at parallel, we remember it's got to be the same thing. So the slope will be 2. Don't put 2 over 1. 2 over 1, you'll get it marked wrong. So it's just 2. Perpendicular, we have the 2. Now we don't know, or we don't have a fraction here, so we're just going to put a line and put a 1. And that tells us that now we can flip it upside down. The 1 on top, the 2 on bottom. This is a positive, so that's going to be a negative. So I'm going to put negative 1 over 2. Again, just if it's positive, make it negative. If it's negative, make it positive. Number 3. Last time, same question. We have the slope. Parallel, the slope stays exactly the same. And then perpendicular, we have the original slope. We flip it upside down, so the 2 goes on top and the 5 goes on bottom. And then we see this one's a negative, so this one will stay positive. It becomes 2 over 5. One of them has to be negative, one of them goes positive. So that's how you do numbers 1 through 3. Number 4. Number 4 is the same type of question, but we see it's in standard form. So to solve this, we just solve for y. We have 7x minus 2y equals negative 1. If we're solving for y, we always just start off by doing the opposite of x, negative 7x on both sides, giving us negative 2y equals, and these never combine. Okay, they always stay separate, and x always comes first. Negative 7x and negative 1. Now we're just going to divide by negative 2, divide by negative 2, and divide by negative 2. And here's our slope, although we see that we have two negatives, so the two negatives will cancel each other out, giving us our parallel line is 7 over 2, because it's got to be the same. This is the slope for this line, so parallel, it needs to be the same, 7 over 2. And perpendicular, we're going to flip it upside down. We get 2 on top, 7 on bottom. This one's a positive, so we'll make this one a negative, and that becomes negative 2 over 7. I got to look at the right one. Flips upside down and turns into a negative. Number 5. Okay, once again, we're in standard form, so we need to find the slope for that. So we have 3x plus 2y equals negative 5. We are going to do the opposite of x, so minus 3x minus 3x, giving us 2y equals, and the x's always come first, negative 3x, and then we have negative 5. Those just stay separate, okay, with the x's first, and then divided by 2, divided by 2, divided by 2. Y equals negative 3 over 2x minus 5 over 2. And we see that we now have our slope. So that's what we're going to put right here, because that's the slope for this line. And a parallel slope is going to be exactly the same, so negative 3 over 2. And we got to make sure, once again, we're looking at parallel. And now we have negative 3 over 2. We're going to flip it upside down, and that becomes 2 over 3. This one's a negative, so that stays a positive, so 2 over 3. And number 6 is the same question, also in standard form. So we have 7x minus 5y equals 2. We're going to do the opposite of x, giving us negative 5y equals, again, those stay separate. The negative 7x comes first. They stay separate because those are x's, and that's a number, and you can't combine x's and numbers. We're going to divide by negative 5, divide by negative 5, and divide by negative 5, and we see our slope right here, because this goes away, and now we have y equals that. We also see that we have negatives, and so this is the slope of this line right here. And so, once again, and I almost fell for this one, make sure you're doing parallel line. And so we have 7 over 5. And with this, we flip it upside down, take the inverse, 5 over 7. We see that this is positive, so this needs to be negative. And that gives us negative 5 over 7 for the perpendicular line. So that's how you do 4 through 6. Number 7. Number 7, we're given lines, and we need to find out if they're parallel, perpendicular, or neither. The first one, we see we have the slope right here given for us. Remember, to find slope, we have to solve for y. Y equals mx plus b. That's our slope. So we need to solve for y, get y by itself. So right here, we have negative 3y equals 4x plus 3. To get y by itself, all I have to do is divide by negative 3. And then those cancel out, giving me y equals negative 4 over 3x minus 1. And now, right there, we see our slope. That's our slope for line 2. Negative 4 over 3. And that's all we got to do for each of these, is just make sure they're solved for y. So now this one, line 3, 8x minus 6y equals 2. We got to solve for y. So that's what we're solving for right there. So we're going to do the opposite of x. Giving us negative 6y equals, and those are x's and those are numbers, we can't combine them, so minus 8x and a positive 2 divided by negative 6, giving us y equals, those cancel out, negative 8 divided by negative 6, if I type it into the calculator, is a positive 4/3, and then minus 3. Remember, you need to have the slope always simplified as far as you can. So that becomes 4 over 3. Now we have our 3 lines, and we see line 1 and line 2. Line 1 and line 2, they're flipped, but they're both negative, so they're neither. Okay, they're not the same, and they're both negative, so they can't be perpendicular. Line 1 and line 3, they're flipped upside down. One's negative, one's positive. That makes them perpendicular. Line 2 and line 3, they don't flip, but one's negative, one's positive, so that would make them neither. If they're not exactly the same, they're not parallel. And they're not flipped upside down, so they're not perpendicular. Number 8 is the same exact type of question. Line 1, we have 3y equals negative 4x plus 5. And we're going to divide by 3, giving us, and that cancels out, we have y equals negative 4 over 3x plus 5 over 3. And here's our slope. So our slope for line 1 is negative 4 over 3. Our slope for line 2 is right there. It's already solved for y. See, y is already by itself. And slope for line 3, we got to solve for y again. 6x minus 8y equals negative 8. And we're going to minus 6x minus 6x. We're trying to get the y by itself. So we have negative 8y equals, and those are x's and numbers, we can't combine them, so negative 6x and negative 8. Now if we divide this by negative 8, that cancels out, leaving us with just y equals, and that's what we wanted. We wanted the y completely by itself. If we simplify this all we can, negative divided by negative is a positive, and that's a 3/4. And negative 8 divided by negative 8 is a positive 1. Here's our slope. So we're just going to put that right here, 3/4. Now line 1 and line 2, negative 4/3, negative 4/3, they're exactly the same. That makes them parallel. Line 1 and line 3, they're flipped upside down, and one's negative, one's positive. That makes them perpendicular. And line 2 and line 3, they're flipped upside down, and one's negative, one's positive. That makes it perpendicular. And number 9 is almost exactly the same. Line 1 is in standard form, so 10x plus 4y equals 6. We're going to solve for y. So we're going to do the opposite of x, 10x, negative 10x. And we have 4y equals negative 10x plus 6. Can't combine them. Divided by 4, divided by 4, and divided by 4. That cancels out, leaving us with y equals negative 10 over 4 is the same thing as negative 5 over 2x. And 6 over 4 is the same thing as 3 over 2. So that's simplified. Here's my slope. Negative 5 over 2. Here's my slope for this one, because it's already solved for y. It's in the y equals mx plus b. And then this one, all we have to do is 5y equals negative 2x plus 6. We just have to divide by 5. And that gets the y by itself because those cancel out. We have y equals negative 2/5 x plus 6 over 5. There's my slope. So negative 2/5. Now we see all of them are negative, which means none of them will ever be perpendicular because one has to be negative, one has to be positive. Line 1 and line 2, they're flipped upside down, but they're both negative. So they're not parallel because they're not exactly the same. They're both negative, so they're not perpendicular. That would make it neither. Line 1 and line 3, again, flipped upside down, but they're both negative. So they're not parallel, they're not perpendicular, they're neither. And line 2 and line 3, they're exactly the same. That makes them parallel. So that's how you do 7 through 9. You just need to find the slope of each of those lines. Solve for y so that you get y equals, and then you have your slope. And that's what you're after right there is your slope. Okay. Number 10. This time we want an equation of a parallel line and an equation of a perpendicular line. Okay? And we're given a point and a slope. All we care about right here is that number right there, the slope. The rest of it is all useless to us. Okay? All we want is the slope because we have a point and the slope, which means now we can use the point slope. That's y minus and then something equals the slope times x minus something. Now what we have here is we're going to put our y value here, our x value here, and our slope right there. Here's our slope, that negative 5. And here's our y. And here's our x. So let's plug it in. Y minus y is negative 6. If you remember, those are always x comma y equals, what's my slope? We said it's negative 5. And then x minus, and our x is right here, negative 4. So here's our equation. And this would give us the same slope, which would make it parallel. Remember, parallel is the same slope. So if we simplify this, that becomes y plus 6 minus a negative is the same thing as plus, equals negative 5 times x plus 4. Again, minus a negative is the same thing as plus. Now we distribute. 5 times x is, or negative 5 times x is negative 5x, and negative 5 times 4 is negative 20. So you see how that distribution happens. It's multiplication. Now we're going to minus 6, and we get y by itself. The 6's cancel out, equals negative 5x, and negative 20 minus 6 is negative 26. So this line is parallel to that line. How do we know? Well, just look at the slopes. The slopes are the same, so we want parallel. So here's where we would write y equals negative 5x minus 26, just like that. Okay. Now let's plug in for the other coordinate, and you see those are exactly the same numbers. So we have y minus y is negative 6 equals, and now we want our slope. Well, we want perpendicular to this. If this is the slope for that line, we want perpendicular. So once again, we're just going to assume there's a 1 under it. We flip it upside down. 1 over 5. This is negative, so that stays positive. So my new slope is 1 over 5 times x minus negative 4. Just like that. And you do have to start way at the very beginning again, because it does change. So y plus 6 equals 1/5 times x plus 4. And we're changing that to plus because minus a negative becomes a plus. The negatives cancel each other out. And so we have y plus 6 equals 1/5 x. And then 1/5 times 4 is 4/5. And you can use a calculator if you need to. Minus 6 minus 6, y equals 1/5 x, and 4/5, or 6 into fifths would be 30 over 5. So 4 minus 30 is negative 26 over 5. And again, if you're not comfortable with fractions, go ahead and use a calculator. So that means this one, perpendicular, is y equals 1/5 x minus 26 over 5. And that's my equation for the perpendicular line. Number 11 is going to be exactly the same. First we find our slope right here. And now we're finding, let's find the parallel line first. It's on top. If we remember, this is x comma y. So we have y minus y, which is negative 3, equals our slope for parallel. We want it the same slope, so parallel is 7, x minus 6. That's our x, right? So now let's simplify. Y plus 3 minus negative is the same thing as plus, equals, let's just do the distribution. We have 7 times x is 7x, and 7 times negative 6 is negative 42. And then we're going to minus 3, y equals 7x minus 45. And that's our equation for the parallel line because it has the same slope. So y equals 7x minus 45, just like that. Now if the slope here is 7, we just put a line and a 1 under it to turn it into a fraction. Now we flip it upside down, make it 1 over 7. This one's positive, so this one has to be negative. There's my slope for the perpendicular line, which is what we're doing right now. So y minus negative 3 equals, our slope for the perpendicular line is negative 1 over 7 times x minus 6. And that gives me y plus 3, because minus a negative, and then equals negative 1 over 7x, and negative 1/7 times negative 6 is positive 6 over 7. And again, use a calculator if you don't get fractions very much. And then minus 3, y equals, the 3's cancel out, negative 1/7 x, and 3 turned into sevenths would be negative 21 over 7. So 6 minus 21. I'll make sure I'm doing this one right. 6/7 minus 3 is 15 over 7. I should have been able to do that in my head, but it's early. So minus 15 over 7. So that's my perpendicular line. Y equals negative 1/7 x and minus 15 over 7. And number 12, the last one that's like that in that section. We have our slope. The rest of it doesn't matter. First, we're asked to find parallel. So x comma y. And I'm just going to change those to plus. They're both negative, so we're going to just change them. Y minus a negative 3 is the same thing as plus 3 equals negative 2 times x minus a negative 5 is the same thing as plus 5. Now we're going to distribute negative 2x and minus 10. And then we're going to minus 3, minus 3. You can't minus 3 from the negative 2x because those are numbers, or excuse me, those are letters and these are numbers. So you got to line up like terms, numbers over numbers. Y equals negative 2x and minus 13. And that's our parallel line. Y equals negative 2x and minus 13. Again, make sure you're putting it in the right spot. Perpendicular, we got to first find the slope. If that's negative 2, we're assuming it's negative 2 over 1 to turn it into a fraction. Put it upside down, it becomes 1 over 2. This is negative, so this has to be positive. So my perpendicular slope is positive 1 over 2. And we see the numbers are the same, so we're going to use y minus a negative 5 is the same thing as plus 5 equals, the slope is 1/2 times x minus a negative 3 is the same thing as plus 3. Now we'll distribute y plus 5 equals 1/2 x and positive 3 over 2. Now we'll minus 5, that cancels out. We have y equals 1/2 x. And 3/2 minus 5. 5 is the same thing as 10 halves. So 3 minus 10 is negative 7 over 2. And that's our perpendicular line. Y equals 1/2 x minus 7 over 2. Just like that. And that's how you do 10 through 12. Now the final three, all we need to do is find the slope. And from that we can tell if it's parallel or perpendicular or neither. Okay, now slope, we just take the two y's, y minus y on top, divided by x minus x on bottom. So what's negative 2 minus 3? Negative 2 minus 3 is negative 5 on top, and negative 7 minus 0 is negative 7. The negatives cancel out, giving me a slope of 5 over 7. We do the same thing here. 1 minus 8 is negative 7. 0 minus a negative 5. Minus a negative is the same thing as plus, so 0 minus a negative 5 is 5, and that's our slope. Negative 7 over 5. And 2 minus a negative 3, minus a negative is plus. 2 plus 3 is 5. And 7 minus 0 is 7. And it doesn't matter which way you subtract. If you do it, 3 minus a negative 2, I mean, that works just fine. 5 over 7. So we look line 1 and line 2. Line 1 has a slope of 5 over 7. Line 2, negative 7 over 5. Those are flipped upside down. One's positive, one's negative. That makes them perpendicular. Line 1 and line 3, those are exactly the same. So we're going to say those are parallel. Line 2 and line 3, they're flipped upside down. One's negative, one's positive, making them perpendicular. So those would be my answers down there. Number 14. Same thing. Y minus y on top, x minus x on bottom. So what's y minus y? What's 2 minus 8 is negative 6 over 0 minus a negative 3. Minus a negative is plus, so 0 plus 3 is 3. That simplifies to negative 2. Always simplify as much as possible. Y minus y, that's negative 5 minus 3 is negative 8. 1 minus a negative 3 is 1 plus 3. Minus negative is plus, so plus 3 is 4. Negative 8 divided by 4 is negative 2. So there's my slope for line 2. And finally, 0 minus 8 is negative 8. Negative 3 minus 1 is negative 4. Negative 8 divided by negative 4 is a positive 2. So we see they're all whole numbers. There's no fractions at all. So we know none of them's perpendicular, because if they were perpendicular, one of them would be a fraction, right? They'd be flipped upside down. So let's see which ones are the same. Line 1 and line 2 are parallel. They're exactly the same. Line 1 and line 3, they're not parallel, they're not the same, and they're not flipped upside down, so they're neither. And line 2 and line 3, again, they're not parallel, they're not perpendicular, they're neither. So that's how you do those types of problems. And number 15. Same thing. Y minus y. 1 minus a negative 2 is 1 plus 2, which is 3. 0 minus a negative 5. Minus a negative is plus, so 0 plus 5 is 5. So line 1 is 3/5. 0 minus a negative, again, plus. 0 plus 4 is 4. Negative 5 minus 5 is negative 10. Again, use a calculator if you're not comfortable with negative numbers. Simplify that as much as possible, and we have negative 2 over 5. And 1 minus 6 is negative 5. And 3 minus 0 is 3, so that becomes negative 5 over 3. So let's look at line 1 and line 2. Line 1 is 3 over 5, and line 2 is negative 5 over 2. They're not the same numbers. They have to be the same numbers to be either one of those, so they're neither. Line 1 and line 3, 3/5, 5/3, one's positive, one's negative. They're flipped and they're switched, which makes them perpendicular. Line 2 and line 3, again, not the same numbers, so they're neither. So that's how you do the test retake. Hopefully this helps a little. Take your time. You know this stuff. Just don't let the words confuse you. Take it one step at a time. If you need any more help, let me know.